In my last video, I tried to explain why modernism is bad, right? What is modernism and why modernism is bad? So remember, the modern period is a period of time that goes from the Renaissance up to the end of World War II. And there are some sort of main ways of thinking. It seems like philosophy and that sort of thing, but I think a lot of people adopted those ways of thinking, and they prevailed over during that time period as the ways that people thought, in distinction to ways they thought before that time period, right? So there's a lot of rationalism during that period, right? This concept that we could sort of, everything that we knew, that was the highest form of knowledge, were things that we could sort of come to a conclusion biologically. Empiricism, that, hey, if we measure everything, that's the real stuff there is to know, is everything that we can measure. Humanism, this concept that human beings are the highest of all things that are out there, right, of existence. Pragmatism, right, that all these philosophies, you could just employ them to help solve all of our problems. And from all of that came a great hopefulness that we would be able to solve all of our problems because we were able to invent new things, new philosophies, new ways of doing things that maybe the previous period on Earth's history, where everybody focused on things like wisdom and theology. This would be a better time, a better hope for humanity. A lot of hopefulness there. That produced some big narratives, right? Like big things that explained the world that people really latched onto, right? So with Karl Marx, for example, he said that humanity could be explained by the economic system that whatever civilization used to run themselves, right? So he said the economic system, in fact, forms people. It makes people into what we are. So if you want to see equality, for example, well, if everybody got paid the same thing, everyone would think of each other as equal and treat each other as equal. And communism, for example, would save some people, right? Didn't exactly work out. But Darwin, for example, he tried to explain everything, all of human nature, as a biological process of us as sort of like these sort of biological machines that react to our environment, and everything is all about trying to pass on your genes and survival of the fittest. And that sort of explained everything about human nature, not the economy, but our biology, maybe, sort of a competing view there. Sigmund Freud, for example, who's right towards the end of all this, he's got this overarching, kind of narrative of everything being about the subconscious, right? The id, the ego, and the superego, that it was all this kind of psychological driver that we repress all of these thoughts and emotions and everything. Kind of they're working behind the scenes, and those are the real reasons why we have everything that we have. Now, he's kind of an overlap guy, but you see these big, grand narratives that seek to explain everything by one particular science. I mark all of those big movements as finding kind of an end with World War II, when they dropped the bomb, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1946. You see this kind of realization that for all of our progress, for all of the things that we could do technologically, for all of the ways in which we were advancing, we aren't really our best hope anymore, right? We aren't really able to solve our problems ourselves, right? And so we run into this new age called postmodern, right? The postmodern age, which is, okay, it will be difficult to explain because we are in it. We don't know which sort of, thought movements are going to be the ones that prevail. It's going to take at least, I think, centuries before we can look back and say, okay, those were the thoughts that won out. Those were the thoughts that most people thought by, that had the most influence on the age. Right now, because we're in the middle of it, it's a little bit harder to tell. But we can see some things with postmodernism, right? First of all, it's the loss of hope. So there's a lot of skepticism of these great big narratives. People don't really believe it's anymore that it's just biology that drives us. People don't believe anymore that the economic system that we employ will save us. People don't believe anymore that it's all psychology, right? There's sort of a lack of belief in all of the things that we were receiving from the last few centuries as all being good for us. They don't seem necessarily all good for us. There's one particular philosopher who comes right before the postmodern age, but who carries over his thought, becomes very influential. His name is Friedrich Nietzsche. And he's sort of, with this sort of skepticism, coming at it saying, this is all, all these things that you're being told, they're all constructs, right? These are, people came up with these ways of looking at the world, and none of it's true. The only thing that's really true is our will to power, right? We want what we want, and we take what we can take, and there's really no such thing as anything else other than our big will to power, right? Absolute truth is no good. It's not real. Of course, he didn't like nihilism, right? The thought that there was nothing out there. He didn't like that, but he definitely said that, this absolute truth that's supposed to guide us and these principles that are supposed to push us forward, they aren't real. And what you really need to do is just look out for the guy who stands to gain in the world, right? And so watch out for those guys. Everybody's out to get something. So a lot of skepticism about especially big institutions and things like that. So you see it's going to be harmful. Nietzsche's thought is going to definitely be harmful to the church. It's definitely going to be harmful to some governments. It's definitely going to be harmful to a whole lot of things that we might have gotten used to for a while, because he's coming in and he's calling it all a whole lot of baloney, right? Friedrich Nietzsche. And there's a big that sort of skeptical criticism of everything big is one of the things that marks the postmodern age, right? So knowledge is just some kind of a construct. Knowledge is context dependent, right? So what you get from that is what you call relativism. So, I can say that I know something, but really that's only according to me and my world. It's relative to me. It's related to me and me alone. So I can know something and say I have my truth, but your truth might be totally different, right? Or if you try to impose your truth on me, that's wrong, because my truth is my truth. Your truth is your truth. We call that relativism. And that's a problem that becomes much bigger in the postmodern age. Everybody has their own truth. They understand the world according to their own context, and that's perfectly fine. There's no one big truth that's true for everybody. It's just according to our context. Then you're going to see that diversity is going to be the new great value, right? What are we going to really be looking for all the time? And I don't just mean racial diversity. I mean any kind of diversity becomes a really good thing to a lot of people, because if knowledge is going to be context dependent, well, then the more contexts that I have access to, maybe the more knowledge I can amass, right? And there's something true about that, right? There's also something kind of strange that we don't have these overarching truths. It's just like a collection of individual truths that can vary from one to another and even contradict. But that's what truth is just a bunch of people who have their own truth. And so diversity becomes the new value. And I mean, it's an absolute value for a lot of people. Again, I'm not talking about racial diversity only. I'm talking about all these different kinds of diversities that are out there. You'll see a love for juxtaposition, right? Two things that don't seem to go together start going together all the time. And it seems pretty neat that you can find a way to make two things that shouldn't go together and put them together, right? During the postmodern era, our current era. A lot of people like that, right? So you think, for example, go back 100 years, you were very unlikely to see, and by unlikely, I mean it wouldn't have been a popular image, to see a nice feminine woman with a face tattoo, right? That would have seemed a little bit odd to most people. Today, our superstars, these are people that we really like and are very, very, very popular, might have tattoos all over their faces, and so for us that doesn't make sense. If you back out a little bit, it's perfectly okay. It doesn't need to make sense. We're in the postmodern age. People don't look for it to make sense, right? Innovation becomes a really great thing, right? So people love anything that's different, even when it's no longer functional. If you think of the most modern buildings, and by modern I mean during this period right now, postmodern buildings, like I'm thinking of the World War II Museum in New Orleans, Louisiana. If you see a picture of the World War II Museum, its architecture doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. That's truly a postmodern building. It doesn't need to make sense. It's okay. We're not trying to make sense. It's just new and it's different. And it's neat in that sense. Think of modern art, which is, again, during the postmodern period, we call it modern art, but it's really postmodern art, is the work of Pablo Picasso, right? Look at Picasso's work, his type of work, cubism, things like that, where it doesn't really need to make sense to the common person. It can be pretty cool and neat, even though it doesn't make sense. People don't look for that kind of stuff. You're going to see a new understanding of the word community. So communities now mean just kind of like collections of things that are totally different and don't need to even relate to one another for them to be communities. And often it's what we call sometimes intersectionality. So it's because people might share in common a fact that they are a minority or oppressed or something along those lines. Because they share that fact, they all come together, even if like the main thing about what they are isn't related. So, not to get too adult here, but I saw, a sign the other day that said "Queers for Palestine," and it was like I don't know that a whole lot of Palestinians that would appreciate that kind of support. Maybe they would, I don't know, but like those two things don't seem to go together. But during the postmodern age, we do this often. We take things that don't seem to go together and we smash them together, and we will even say this is what a community is, when in fact it's not a functioning community. Like we normally think of, where you have, let's say a mother and a father and children who live in a neighborhood, who live in a city, who live in a state, that sort of thing, where things function according to their relationships. This is like they're going to function because the one thing they have in common is that they are, there's that intersectionality, that they're oppressed or something like that, right? Or they feel that they're oppressed. So what you wind up with is, going back to Nietzsche, who is really just before the period we're in now. Nietzsche kind of was one who said everybody's after power, everybody's looking to exercise their power. You see that kind of ethic win the day. So it's whoever can scream the loudest, whoever can gather together the most people to raise the most heck, and cause the most trouble. They often feel more powerful that way because they've sort of come together with that power, and that's the lens through which we now judge some things. And so what it means to be in this age is to have to recognize those kinds of movements are the powerful movements. This has led to, in this period, what we might call existential dread, right? This sense that maybe, because anybody can be anything, and nothing is really always true, it's only true in these contexts, that the world seems to feel, according to like our bones, our deepest feelings, seems to feel just a little bit less meaningful. And our own existence seems to feel just a little less important. And so because we're not thinking a lot about, things like religion, and we're not thinking a lot about what happens when you die, we mostly believe that nothing happens when you die. Maybe you stop existing or something. And so your own existence seems like this limited time period of baloney. And why should I exist if life is hard? Why shouldn't I put an end to it? And so you'll see, for example, the rate of people who do that goes up quite a bit, right? And I think it's raised by, let's see, I had some stats here, 40% in the last 20 years. In the United States, the rate of that has gone up 40% in the last 20 years. Some of that, I'm absolutely convinced, is a chemical imbalance and people dealing with that. And I don't mean to put that in the same category as what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is those people who sort of logically conclude that there's a meaninglessness to life, and so therefore they don't need to worry about their own, extending their own in any kind of, do anything to keep their own life going, right? And marked maybe overall of everything that I'm talking about is a sense of deconstructing everything out there. So we'll look at a thing and we'll say, that's not that thing, it's just this, So we'll look at something that's beautiful, and we'll say, that's not beautiful, that's just, it only looks beautiful because it has colors that are pleasing to my eyes, and I was raised to think that these things are beautiful, so it's just a social construct, it's just a biological reaction to the thing. It's not really beautiful in and of itself. There's no beauty there. It's just, it's just something lower than that. And me feeling like something is beautiful is really just, dopamines in my brain. And what dopamines really are just a sort of a chemical compound. And what chemical compounds are, they're really just atoms. And we keep saying, everything that we understand keeps getting deconstructed into something smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point of even losing its meaning in any kind of real discernible way. So that's postmodernism, but, this is a pretty important exception to everything I'm saying. In the middle of all of this sort of postmodern meaninglessness, problem that we're facing, you see a kind of a counterpunch of what I think some people mean when they say that you're a neo-modernist, right? I got called a neo-modernist the other day. I thought it was kind of funny. Neo-modernism, I would call neo-modernism a sort of a counterpunch to postmodernism by saying, oh yes, we don't give up on empiricism. We don't give up on rationalism. We don't give up on humanism and pragmatism. I still believe that we can fight our way through all of this. Now, I think during the modern period, there was a lot of hopefulness. I think these neo-moderns are not always hopeful. They're more just angry. Right? They're more just mad because you got, men participating in women's sports. You got, nobody can define what a woman is, and it blows our minds. And so we get mad about it. And so we fight back using the tools of the previous few centuries. We don't always go back to where I think we should be going back to. I think we should be going back to the wisdom of the ages. I'm talking thousands of years, the kind of wisdom that accumulated around a recognition of God becoming one of us. I think Jesus is the key to everything. Big surprise, right? I think Jesus is the key to everything. But not everybody does. Some people have latched on to this postmodern way of just saying that nothing matters, or this neo-modern way of saying, like, I'm going to fight postmodernism by going backwards just a few centuries and coming back and fighting with science and rationalism and all that other kind of stuff. So that is postmodernism in a nutshell. We may look back at everything that I just said in a century and say that was all wrong. I don't know. But that's a stab at it, at least for non-philosophers, for people who aren't studying this forever. If you just want a good, 15-minute sort of summary of postmodernism, there you have it. Let's pray that God guides us with that guiding light of truth and with a spirit of love, and ultimately with that virtue of hope in Him and Him alone. Amen.